Okay, next section. Completing the square. First off, we want to change. We can do this first example and have it solve with a radical, but I'd rather just have a simpler one. So we're going to make this 25. So remember from lesson 2.1, we learned that if we have something square, we can use the square root property to solve. So I'm going to take the square root of this side and cancel the squaring. And I'm going to take the square root of this side. What I end up with is x minus 4 equals, remember, plus or minus 5. Now again, I could have had square root of 24 and simplified it, but I want to just get to a simpler number here. So remember, I'm going to have x minus 4. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I'm going to have x minus 4 equal positive 5 and negative 5. So now when I add 4 to both sides, I get 9 and I get negative 1. Two different answers. Which if I check that and plug it in, 9 minus 4 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. And negative 1 minus 4 is negative 5 squared is 25. So those are my two answers, and that's how I use the square root property. Now, we also understand if we have something times itself, we can write it as a square. So, these are called perfect square trinomials. Let's just factor it first off, and we'll talk about it. I need two numbers that multiply to give me 16 that add up to 8. Well, 1 and 16 add up to 17. 2 and 8 add up to 10. 4 and 4. Oh, there we go. 4 and 4. Now, since this is negative, these both have to be negative. And notice they're both exactly the same. That's why it's called a perfect square trinomial. This number right here is half of this number. Okay? And so, this ends up being x minus 4 squared. Notice here. Well, when I said half this number, I'm sorry. That this number, if I take half of it, I get 4, and I square it, and I get 16. Look here. If I take half of 6 and square it, I get 9. But let's go back with normal, old school guess and check. I need two numbers that multiply to give me 9 that add up to 6. 1 and 9 add up to 10. 3 and 3, there we go. And since this is negative, I need them both to be negative. X minus 3 squared. Once again, what's half of negative 6? Negative 3. I square that, I get 9. That's going to be very important for today's lesson. Because there's times that we don't have something squared and we can't factor it. We need to do something else, and that's called completing the square. So first off, make sure your lead coefficient, which is right here, is 1. We have that. Move the constant term to the other side. But leave a space here for the perfect square number. Now, we're going to ask ourselves, what's half of the coefficient of the x term? What's half of 8? It's positive 4. Now, I'm going to tell you a little cheat here. Write positive 4 right here. Okay, so we're going to come down, and then we're going to come back up here and square it. So we're going to add 16, and whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. Now it says factor the trinomial into a perfect square. Well, here's why I showed you that sheet. All you have to do is do this, and you've got it. Remember how we talked about above? Half of this and square it is that parentheses. There you go. Equals 16 minus 5, 11. And now I'm going to take square root of both sides. And I get x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 11. Now remember, before I wanted to have a simple example of 25 and come down to 5. Here we're going to have the other way, where we have a plus or minus a radical, and that's okay. So I'm going to subtract 4. And there's my answer. X is equal to -4 plus or minus square root of 11. So find the value of C that would make this a perfect square trinomial. Then write it as a binomial square. So here's our shortcut. What's half of -4? -2. Write it right here. Now square it. C is +4. Now write this as a perfect square, right there. Or the binomial square, sorry. Okay? Again, half of 10, 5. 5 squared is 25. So C would be 25. Just put it in parentheses and square it, we're done. Okay? Half of this, half of -3 is -1.5. It's not always going to be nice and pretty. We square -1.5. So 1.5 times 1.5. Take your calculators out and do that. .25. So C is 2.25. There we go. X minus 1.5 squared would give you x squared minus 3x plus 2.25. Okay, now we're actually solving. So, is this 1? It is. Move the 6 over. X squared minus 4x, leave a space, equals -6. Take half of the -4, write it right here. Square it, and add it to both sides. X minus 2 squared equals -2. Take the square root of both sides. We get x minus 2 equals plus or minus. Now, before we couldn't deal with the square root of a negative number. Well, we can here. We can take the I out. And now we just add 2 to both sides. X equals 2 plus or minus I radical 2. Okay, so this is equal to 1. We move the 40 over. X squared plus 14x, leave a space, equals -45. Half of 14 is 7. So I'm going to write plus 7 right here. Square it is 49. Add it to both sides. Now, cheat is, I just write x plus 7 squared. That is this factor. Equals plus or minus the square root, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Equals 49 minus 45, which is 4. Now, I square root both sides to get rid of that 2. And so I get x plus 7 equals plus or minus 2. So that's x plus 7 equals positive 2, and x plus 7 equals negative 2. I subtract 7 from both sides, and I get -5, and I get -9. Okay. Notice here, not equal to 1. I need to divide everything by 2. X squared minus 4x plus 6 equals 0. Okay, now we factor that out. We're going to divide both sides by -2, positive 2. Which leaves me with x squared minus 4x plus 6 equals 0. I'm going to move the 6 over. Leave a space. Now I take half of -4, be. We're going to square negative 2 and put plus 4. Plus 4. So x minus 2 squared equals negative 2. Now I square root both sides. I'm going to have to use my I. X minus 2 equals plus or minus I root 2. Add 2 to both sides. X equals 2 plus or minus I root 2. Again, I'm going to take out a negative 3. So remember, we want the lead coefficient to be 1, not negative 1. So that's x squared minus 2x minus 10 equals 0. If I divide by negative 3, I end up with this. Minus 2x minus 10 equals 0. I'm going to move the 10 over, negative 10 over, by addition. Leave the space. I'm going to write my negative 1 here. Add 1 to both sides. That gives me 11. Square root. I get x minus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 11. I can't simplify that, and it's positive, so it's okay. Now I just add 1 to both sides, and that's my answer.